Good day. Thanks for taking a look at my video. Today we're going to talk about how to create a bootable USB drive with Ubuntu so that we can use it as a live CD to boot a computer into Ubuntu without actually installing it, or actually install it and have a fully bootable PC with Ubuntu installed directly onto it. The first step, of course, is actually having a copy of Ubuntu downloaded that you can use, which we did in our previous video if you saw it. Or you can click on it. It's how to download Ubuntu 12.04. Now, the version 12.04 that we're working with, the Precise Pangolin, very strange, bizarre name, but you know, it's unique, I guess. And it is also the LTS version, or long-term support version of Ubuntu, as we also again discussed in our last video. The beauty of the long-term support version is that it is good for 5 years, or it is fully supported for 5 years. 3 years on the desktop, however, but 5 years on a server, which is very, very important to keep in mind. Now, for many people, all this really means is that the Ubuntu and Ubuntu community will officially support it. You could always, even if it's outside of support, always try and find someone to get support for Ubuntu. But regardless of all that, the LTS version is designed for people who want a little more stability in their software. So here's how we're going to do this. Now, in this document that we're looking at here today we're looking at a web page, which is the actual Community Help Wiki documentation page for how to install from USB stick. And it goes through the entire process. It also covers the various OSs, such as Mac OS, Windows, for example. It also talks about using alternate boot methods, as opposed to using the methods that are built into the Startup Disk Creator, which is through Grub. As you can see, it also talks about the prerequisites. Now, in their methodologies, they use 2 machines. I don't. I only use 1 machine, but it's ideally for in their steps a lot simpler to use it in 2. As you see with a Mac, you got to run some funky little commands in a terminal, which for most Mac users is probably bizarre. You've also got the Ubuntu Linux methodology. And the key thing here that it describes is that it's talking about using USB Creator Package either in KDE on Kubuntu or with the GTK front end in GNOME Unity, the normal Ubuntu package. So there's a bunch of things to keep in mind there. Also talks about having the Windows methodology, and there's also a booting from computer from USB. It shows you how to actually boot the computer. And unfortunately, this is a really silly piece of documentation if you read it, because it doesn't really tell you anything specific. And the reason it can't tell you anything specific is because all hardware manufacturers have their own specific uniqueness. You need to read on your particular PC how to do this. Now, these instructions will be found either in your motherboard manual, depending on the type of motherboard that you have, or if you have a laptop, it'll be found in the documentation for your laptop on how to boot it. Matter of fact, 9 times out of 10, well, I'm lying, 10 times out of 10, you're going to find this information also at the boot stage of the computer. You just have to watch for it. And timing sometimes is very critical. Some particular boards or BIOSes are very fussy about when they receive the signal, indicating that you want to pick up an alternate boot menu or go to the BIOS menu or whatever. So, you know, it's something that you need to really dedicate and learn specific on your computer. Obviously, you could put up videos for every branded computer imaginable to do this. They're all pretty much the same. So the instructions there are vague, but they are about as accurate as you can get in a general, in a generic sense, I guess. Because, like I said, they're trying not to be hardware specific, but all hardware has its own specific ways of doing it. One computer might use delete, another computer might use tab, another computer might use F1, another computer might use F8, another computer might use whatever. So it's one of those things you really got to pay attention to with your system. If you don't know, and that's really bothering you a whole heck of a lot, you know, hey, leave me the details of your system, like the make, model, number, You know, like say, hey, I've got an HP G6 model 550, and I can't figure out how to get into the BIOS menu, or how to get to the boot menu, or whatever it is you have. Again, tell me like what kind of motherboard, and then I can get you some help in figuring out how to get your computer booted exactly with the right instructions. But without knowing the exact computer, you just got to kind of look around and figure it out. But anyways, there's all kinds of things here that are described, as well as the alternate methods of booting, using alternate boot managers to get the accomplishments that you want to do. But that's really all there is to that. So we're going to get rid of this window here for the moment, minimize it, and we're then going to bring up our tool, which should be running here, and I just don't see it. It was running. Okay, well, we'll start it again here. So we're clicking on the dash home button, which is this guy right up here in the top left, as you can see. It brings up the blast used kind of thing, or a little search window, and we can type anything we want here. In this case, we typed USB, and it came up with our Startup Disk Creator tool. So we start our Startup Disk Creator tool. Now, when Startup Disk Creator starts, it looks for two things. It looks in our downloads or our desktop for ISOs. If it finds it and it recognizes it particularly as an Ubuntu ISO, it will preload the drive, or the disk, I should say, in the software here, as well as a USB. If we had a viable USB key installed, something that it could install to, it would have brought that up into here as well. So as you remember yesterday, this was actually the version of Ubuntu that we downloaded. If you remember correctly as well, it was a 64-bit version, not a 32-bit version. Doesn't matter. It's all the same thing in this process. It makes no difference. The only difference is, will it install on your computer? 32-bit, as I stated, will install on any computer. 64-bit will only install on a computer that has a fully supporting 64-bit CPU and motherboard. So now that we've found our ISO that we're going to be installing, which is the latest one, as you can see here, we now need to put in a USB drive to install to. Now, again, I have a 2 gigabyte drive, which I always have used since, oh gosh, version 8.10, I think, or 8.04, to make a bootable disk. So as you can see, once I've installed the USB drive on my computer, plugged it in, the system has automatically detected it as a viable disk. If there was more than one, there would be a list here, and I could pick which one. But I've always found it's easy to try to keep it as simple as possible for the program and stick with one. As you can see, this is a Kingston Data Traveler 2.0 gigabytes is what it's going to say. It has no label, and the capacity is, well, 1.9 gigabytes after formatting, and right now it's 1.2 gig of free space. We're going to erase this disk because it has the old versions of Ubuntu on it. It's going to ask for my password to do the erase. There. And it is done. Once it is completed, it opens a file system showing us an empty file system. As you can see, there was a couple error messages that occurred during the process. Just ignore them. It's just the processes itself is getting a little ahead of itself. It's not waiting until the format is completed. And as well here, we have the ability to say, when starting from this disk, we can put our documents in settings, will be stored in reserved extra space, or discarded on shutdown. Now, because, as you can see, it says, unless you save them elsewhere. Because we use a persistent drive that has our documents and settings on it, we don't keep them on the actual disk itself. This means that we can use the USB drive as an exact copy all the time. So we know once it's done, once it's complete, once it's working, it's never going to fail on us unless it actually dies. This way, we're not keeping anything on it. We're not storing files. We're not storing settings, which could trash our desktop or anything of that feature. So once we've got this done, then we says, yes, here's the image that we're going to be using. Here's the data drive that we're going to be installed to. We've formatted it so it's clear. We are not going to store anything in reserve space. And we click Make Startup Disk. At this point, it goes through the process of copying the files. It used to take a considerable amount of time in the past to do this. Today, it's managing this whole process very quickly. I'm quite impressed with how it's doing the decompressions and compressions, or not, to move the files over. Because, like I say, in the past, it used to take several minutes. Now it's down to just a couple. So we'll sit here and watch the process while I babble away here. Now, also, I'm going to take an opportunity here just to discuss a little bit about Unity, because a lot of people have really pissed on Unity as the most evil desktop ever invented or ever used. And I have to say I disagree. What I don't like about Unity is the fact that it attempts to be kind of a cross between what Windows is and what Mac is. It doesn't attempt to be something of itself. And I've really liked the way that even GNOME, for example, has done things in the past, because at least it's tried to create an identity for itself. And now, unfortunately, thanks to tablets, we're now realizing this all has to change. You know, we can't have tiny little icons on our desktop anymore in high resolution. We have to, because someone on a tablet might want to use the same thing and they'd never be able to access it. So they've gone to bigger icons again. You know, which is really funny, because I remember in the days gone past, we used to have really big icons. And then they started going smaller and smaller and smaller. Like 128 pixel-sized icons were very common. Today, you know, 32-bit or 32 pixel were more common. Now they're kind of moving back towards 128. But, you know, anyways. It's just one of those interesting things, how things change. Okay, so at this point, wants to install the bootloader onto the USB, which we're going to allow, and it's going to create this little thing here. Now, if you weren't paying attention to the download or to the install of the make disk, you wouldn't have realized that this had anything to do with it. And I really blame Canonical for not clearly explaining this in their USB creator tool. But regardless, this is what it's doing here, so we're good to go. We'll let that authenticate, let it install the bootloader. Otherwise, the USB won't boot. It's just that simple. So it's got to be done. Now, once that is done, it says the installation is complete. You may run Ubuntu on other computers by booting them with this drive inserted. So that's great. Well, you know, we should always make sure that once we're done, we'll click quit to say we're done. We should safely remove the device from our computer. But that's really all there is to it. We can now boot this computer up, use it to install on other computers, whatever we want. Keep in mind that we know that it is a 64-bit version, not a 32-bit version. So, that's pretty well it. I thank you very much for watching my video today. I hope this was educational and maybe even a little bit of entertainment for you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them below. I'll be glad to read them and get your feedback. And have a great day.